Hello, everybody, and welcome to our review of Dr. Sleep, the many, many decades later sequel to The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's 1980 horror masterpiece, and according to Stephen King, not good adaptation of his novel. We'll get into a bunch of that. I'm Dan Murrell.
I'm Roth Cornet, and yeah, it's interesting because Dr. Sleep, for me, feels like this amalgamation of one, honoring what Kubrick did, which is in the latter half of the film, and then in the first half, kind of honoring King's take, which he was not happy, notably, with The Shining as a film. So it's interesting in that respect, and I think it's in part both its strength and its weakness. Overall, I love Mike Flannagan as a director. I love the way he does horror. He's really able to, I think he's one of the better people at tapping into relationships and family drama, and then kind of illustrating that through horror motifs. Ari Aster's another one that I think is good at that. But in that respect, this film works. And in that respect, there's a scene that happens very early on in the film with Danny, who Ewan McGregor plays, of course, the adult Danny.
The little kid from The Shining.
Red Rum, you know, Tony, my little finger friend Tony.
Yes.
He who shines. And that has nothing to do with The Shining, that has nothing to do with the horror elements, that only has to do with the devastation that he's felt as a human and how far that has taken him in terms of his inability to connect with other people. And it is, for me, the most horrific sequence in the film, and the scariest and the most affecting. So to me, that speaks to a lot of what Mike Flanagan's strengths are as a director. He's a great director. Stephen King, notably as a novelist, doesn't always end things well. What's your take?
I think that I'm a huge Shining geek. Not just the Kubrick movie, the novel, which I've read several times. I've watched the ABC miniseries. It is a property that I've just always been fascinated by, and to the point where I didn't read Dr. Sleep because I was like, I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to ruin it. I didn't want to ruin The Shining.
Oh,
I didn't want to. I didn't want to, like. I knew that Stephen King wrote a sequel, but I was like, I don't even want to do. I love it. I love it so much. I love every version of it in its own way. So that's how I came into the movie, and I didn't really know what to expect as far as how much is it going to play off of. The trailers and stuff have used the iconography of Kubrick's film, but I didn't know like how much of it is going to be just. Is it a cheap ploy to bring people in and then sort of this weird mesh of a story? I really, really, really like this movie a lot. First of all, as you said, Mike Flanagan is a great director. I love how he approaches horror. I think there's maybe one or two jump scares in this movie.
Though. He's so restrained.
But it's more stylistic. Yeah. It's not like a cheap ghost jumping out. It's much more about the slow dread. Tonally, it feels in line with Kubrick's film, and the aesthetic of it, as well as just the plot and stuff. Like it's not like I read some things before. It's like, well, it's a weird hybrid between Kubrick's thing and King. As far as like it being a sequel, it is 100% absolutely a follow up from Kubrick's film.
Sure,
However,
but the Overlook, I don't think is, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but in the book Dr. Sleep, I don't think the Overlook. They don't go to the Overlook.
They may not. I haven't. Yeah.
And so that's the part where it's 100% harkening back, and once they arrive back at the Overlook to Kubrick's film,
right?
100%.
Well, but that for me was actually where I really started to dig it, because that third act where we revisit literally the first film. Dug into so many of the things that I think a lot of the book lovers like myself have thought were missing from Kubrick's film. Both like literal plot, like devices, etc., but also themes and stuff that I think we were talking about it on our trailer commentaries this week that were kind of skated over in Kubrick's film. It delves so deeply into those that I think that this actually, again, as a fan of both the book and the movie, I think this bridges the two and really brings a complete circle to this story in a way that allows Kubrick's film to stand as it is, without having to retcon anything or retroactively explain anything, but also incorporate the story elements and the thematic elements that I think a lot of fans of the book, Stephen King himself, thought were missing from this story. Yeah. So I actually think, we talked about Terminator Dark Fate and how I felt like I didn't like the fact that they were bringing back characters and trying to tell a new chapter, but it felt cheap because really what they're just doing is kind of a reboot or a remake or whatever you want to call it. It was a reset. A reset.
Yeah.
This movie to me is one that I would point to as one that where a story is allowed to go in a new direction to introduce new elements and new characters, at the same time bringing in older characters and elements, servicing that story and advancing a different story, but not at the expense of the first one. I really, really, really liked this movie.
So I think it's great that you're coming from that perspective, and I think it probably will speak to a lot of people that have a similar perspective and are really huge fans of The Shining, the book. Mm-hmm. I am a huge fan of the movie, and I never read the book, actually. Mm-hmm. So whether King's take was right or wrong, it's certainly not for me to say either way. Mm-hmm. He's the author. But I love Kubrick's movie. And I love Ewan McGregor as an actor. Like, in fact, I would point to one of the things that Mike Flannagan is best at is casting. Mm-hmm. And all of the performances in this film, I think, elevate it. And elevate the nature of the story. You have this group of kind of menacing beings that frankly don't have a lot to do in what they say. Mm-hmm. We don't really have a lot of lore about them, that we don't totally understand what they are even, which is interesting choice on his part. However, they're still fully realized. And you get that as monstrous as they truly are, and as consuming of innocence in a literal way as they truly are, they do care about each other. Mm-hmm. And there's some semblance of humanity, which makes them all the more interesting, I think, as characters. So Rebecca Ferguson,
Rose the Hat
is freaking extraordinary.
She's really good, and I love that she leads this cult of people who basically hunt
those who shine
down people who shine, and literally feed off of them. Mm-hmm. And the aesthetic of that I thought was so cool.
I thought so too. And there's something about that idea of like, the non-vampire vampire, those mm-hmm. who would take and steal from what makes other people special. Yeah. Is a very real thing in our world. And maybe it's not quite so literal, but there are people that would take from people what makes them special. They would take it for themselves. They would remove it from that person. Yeah. In a kind of more metaphorical way. I think Mike Flannagan directs the crap out of this movie. Yeah. It's not relying on jump scares. He's better than that. Mm-hmm. It's creepy. It's tonally engaging. I care about the characters. I care. The most extraordinary thing that I think he's able to do is reintroduce the characters from The Shining. Mm-hmm. With new actors, and these are not easy roles to revisit, and it actually works. I think there's a little trick and a little struggle at the end with one. Mm-hmm. It's a little harder with that one, but for the most part, all of that, it works for me. I think when we get back to the Overlook, my one complaint would be it feels a little, remember this ghost, and remember that ghost, and remember this ghost. Mm-hmm. It's a little remember this. But up until that point, this mm-hmm. is an incredible character arc for Danny, and a credible redemption story for him. Mm-hmm. And then we get a new Shiner. Yeah. Shiny. Shine On.
Played by Kylie Curran, who is really, really good in this movie. A great performance from her.
She really is. She's such a badass.
Yeah, and also Rebecca Ferguson is great, but I wrote down his name because a lot of times these actors that aren't on the marquee but that play these great roles are in it.
Who you know from Westworld.
Well, I don't watch Westworld, so I don't, but I know him now from this movie. Okay. But there's an actor named Zahn McClarnon.
Unbelievable.
who plays sort of the heavy, not the heavy in the sense of like an enforcer, but the very menacing kind of second right hand person who is fantastic in this movie.
He's so good. So you know him from Westworld and maybe also from Fargo.
And I think it really is. I could feel Mike Flannagan. I will agree that the third act, I think, because I suspect, and I haven't read Mike Flanagan's thought on the movies, but I suspect that he shares that thing of The Shining, the only detractor from The Shining, the film, Kubrick's film, which is brilliant and I love, is the absence of some of these things. And I do feel like in his mind as a writer and director, you can feel like I am going to incorporate these things now into it in a way that is reverent to Stephen King's original work and Kubrick's film. You're right. That's a perspective that not everybody's going to have. And you do get a little of the members. They are bringing people back at some point where, and just faces or that you remember that you're like, okay, but I just felt it was that far from too far. I agree with you about the new actors things when they do choose to revisit the time period, and it's not specifically clips or whatever you've seen before, but the time period. I am so glad that they do not cut to cartoon Shelley Duvall, with her uncanny valley CG face as they try to, like, it is so much less distracting to recast. And I wish they'd done it with Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. I think it was Joe or Lon that suggested, like, just cast Charles Dance and you buy him, he's Grand Moff. I so wish that they would stop doing that so much of just like cartoon faces. I think they pull it off. I agree that there's some trickier parts, but I think that the content of that scene
is so strong.
Overwhelms what may be stylistically a bit tough to swallow.
Well, there's a scene with Ewan McGregor that's so emotional, and it's with an actor that's been recast, but Ewan McGregor is so extraordinary in that scene, and it's such a culmination of what he's gone through in the film that it still works. I think it still works.
Ewan McGregor is fantastic. For me, there is an actor who I believe is uncredited, so I won't say who it is, who plays a very small role in the film. And I wondered at first, like, why would you cast somebody this recognizable, a young actor, for this role? And then it becomes very clear why they needed an incredibly strong actor. That, for me, was the most horrific and terrifying sequence in the film. And it is really just underscores the evil at play in the world and the danger, but in a very visceral and disturbing way that you need somebody that's a really strong actor to do.
There's a scene. I know the scene you're talking about, and it does not pull any punches. No. It's scary not because of any horror tropes at all, but because of how raw and brutal it is. It is so raw and brutal and disturbing, and sets the tone for the rest of the movie and helps instill this fear that you need to have of this basically cult. And urgency, because the protagonist, she bears witness to what happens, and so everything that is motivating her has been justified by how brutal that scene was. You buy that there is an intensity and an urgency for her to make amends.
Not make amends,
but
it's a call to action. Yes.
Make the world right again to the degree that she can.
I like I said, I really like this movie. I think it's a great horror film in a way, in a more classical way that The Shining, the original Shining, is and was. I think the performances across the board. Cliff Curtis is in a supporting role in this movie. He's great. You even have an actor like Bruce Greenwood that pops up for a few scenes and just adds that extra gravitas to it. And then I really do think that if for you can feel how much of a fan that Mike Flannagan is of the movie and the book, and it almost feels like this was like a Quantum Leap-esque mission for him to like go back and set right what once went wrong. And I understand the concerns with the third act. I agree. It's sometimes it verges from being too precious for me, but also it's so great for me now as a fan to have a version of this story now. They go together. It's not an awkward fit. It feels satisfying, and it brings in the best of Kubrick and the best of King are now exist together as a movie and a direct sequel. There's no weird retconning that you have to do. One leads directly into the other. That gave me a lot of joy. And so it's a big recommendation for me, partially because I am such a fan of both Kubrick's film and King's novel that this really was a great hybrid of both for me.
It's a recommendation from me for the performances, for the direction, and for the 75 to 80% of the film. I will say 10% of the film, to me, edged on hokey.
I get it.
But that said, it wasn't an ending where you said that ending ruined it at all, not even close. It just sort of slightly detracted from what I thought was so strong before that. But there's some moments at the Overlook that I think are the best in the film.
Yeah, and it touches on themes of trauma.
Yeah.
What you pass on, how you pass things on.
How you absolve yourself of your past.
Yes. There's a lot of really deep stuff going on.
Which is what he does so well, which is what Mike Flannagan does so well. And I may be a little particularly sensitive to remember this moment, and then you see it again. I think I'm worn out from that a little bit, just as a viewer. But it's certainly done in about as graceful a way as you could do it. And with that in mind, it's a recommendation for me too.
Yeah. So there you go. 2 recommendations for Dr. Sleep. It hits theaters next Friday. You get here in North America. You can check it out there. Roth, we got many more reviews coming down the pike. We've got some award-winning or award-eligible movies that a lot of people think are going to be on there coming up. We've got big movies. We're heading into the Thanksgiving weekend. We got Disney films. We got you name it. We got it coming up.
And you should watch, you should watch The Irishman.
Yeah.
Both the review and the movie.
Yes.
That's out this weekend.
Watch both of those. We also have a review for Terminator Dark Fate, which hits theaters this weekend. Also, in wide release.
Yeah.
You can check that out as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.